colonialism. This is the colonial moment, the influence of whatever it might be. But I would say this is a paradigm shift in the tradition that need not be attributed to any particular set of colonial factors, though these may, of course, impinge on the broader context, but need not be explained in terms of a sort of colonial rupture narrative. It's a different kind of shift, different kind of rupture, maybe within the tradition. So I'm sorry I took so long today. Thank you so much. That's it. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucian. As far as I am concerned, I'm still learning this field, and listening to, I could gather that it's so vast and complicated, so complex, and that too. What is so amazing about it is that it was practiced so widely by such a large number of people, and we have got no idea about it. So we are, colleagues are pursuing post-colonial studies and indigenous studies, but these are the areas that we need to focus on, and I think it will take us a lot of time and effort to understand the complexities, the varieties, the whole paraphernalia. I was listening to it very closely, and I could understand how widely spread it is. And also your concluding remark that scholars working on the Vaishnava system, the Vaishnava tradition, has focused mostly on the more or less stable orthopraxy, as you said. But you talked about the many-sidedness, the multiplicities within that orthodox system, and the evolutions which not necessarily can be attributed to the colonial shift, as you rightly pointed out, but also it evolved through different centuries, through different practices. But this is really very interesting. I have one or two questions definitely, but before I ask those, I would request those who are present. We are really fortunate to have Professor Lucian also, who is also a great scholar of Vaishnava tradition.
Okay.
So,
he wrote a landmark work, his book on Chaitanya, is a life.
yes. So,
no, but I was a little intrigued to hear.
You can switch on, right?
Is it working?
It's a light.
No,
I think that's not working. So you can.
Anyway, I think I'm loud enough. I was a little intrigued to hear that orthodoxies are stable. I said orthodoxies are stable. Gentleman here said, I think he seemed to conjoin some kind of fluidity with orthodoxy. That is true, but I don't know how that could also produce an orthodoxy and stability. Because orthodoxies are by definition unstable, and they're plural. And if something which is plural can't be all that stable. That's one. Two further brief questions to you, and these are all predictably historical in nature. Firstly, do you think the whole idea of even the practice of Raganuga Bhakti is preempted in Chaitanya's own paradigm of Ahetuki Bhakti? Because that's the word he uses, I think, and as reported by both Chaitanya Bhagavat and Chaitanya Charitamrita. So do you think a continuity exists between these two things? Maybe one of them is more a practice than an idea, but the idea seems to have been preempted in the idea of Ahetuki, non-motivated and non-causal kind of. That's one. The other thing is more interesting, particularly as a historian. Do you think Raganuga Bhakti represents the infusion of yogic techniques on Bhakti devotional center? And does it have a historical context as to why and how and when this happened? Because as I see, it's much of a technique that they're practicing. I mean, this Manmatha thing that you said is pure technique, isn't it? It's psychological technique. So, does it come from Hatha Yoga philosophy? Is that also an input into the whole tantric order of embodying sentiments or perfecting the body? And finally, how does a practitioner know if the body has turned siddha?
It's turned what?
Siddha.
Oh, yeah.
As if he has attained siddhahood. Is it the privilege of the Guru to tell you, or is it also self-prescription? Which of these two are correct?
Thank you so much for those excellent questions, Amir. I will take them chronologically. So the first was, well, the first was an observation. I'll take the questions, I think. I think the observation was great. But Ahaituki, is this the first question?
Yeah.
Ahaituki Bhakti. Yeah, I will, okay, so in terms of the biographical representation, at least in the context, so you're taking Chaitanya Bhagavat, I saw it in your work, but I haven't paid attention to it in reading Chaitanya Bhagavat, but Chaitanya Charitamrita, for sure, it appears, and the notion there of Ahaitiki Bhakti, of course it also features in, it's a famous verse from Bhagavata Purana, Ahaitiki Apratihata, it's unmotivated and unchecked. This is a Bhagavat verse, and of course, then attributed to Chaitanya. But do we have any unmediated access to Chaitanya? So, for example, the biographical tradition itself, as
you can't write histories.
You can't write histories of these figures, exactly. So you can. I don't think. I'm not saying that you can't write history, but that, as we see in the work of the Final Word, for instance, we see Krishnadas putting words that are found in the text of something like the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu into the of Rupa Goswami, into the word mouth of Chaitanya, imbuing it with his authority, and then speaking to Rupa Goswami. So part rhetorical, of course, that's rhetorical. That's a kind of however you want to frame it. It's discursive technique. Yeah. But I have no doubt the prevalence of the Bhagavat, we know that Chaitanya, if the biographies are anything to go by, privileged the Bhagavat, Sridhar's commentary on the Bhagavat. And the continuity of the two, I think, is, this is it in that, I don't know whether it's being framed as Shuddha Bhakti, so the Gaudiyas would understand Shuddha Bhakti or Uttama Bhakti, the highest devotion, as attainable by Raganuga. So there seems to be, so I would agree with that, yes. The second question was it the yogic one or
the possible infusion of yoga into Bhakti sentiments?
Yes.
And can we sort of think of a reason for that? A historical reason or a social reason? Or purely in terms of techniques?
Yeah. So I say, so part of the point of the talk today was that you see, and it's not that the Gaudiyas aren't incorporating, I see, Pancharatra, Tantra, Tantra more broadly, Gaudiyas
it's
practice, exactly. It's a ritual. Gaudiyas turning to these texts, this corpus of texts, for their formal ritual, and increasingly more so. So they do so at the level of Vaiti, or Archana, there's Archan, but then increasingly more so over time, doing so to frame Raganuga, which previously I said was devoid of technique, and then becomes technified, technologized, if you will, and to do that, formalize that reframing, you then turn to the existing ritual corpus, which is, interestingly though, and this isn't so much Hatha, but yoga more broadly, Patanjali Yoga Shastra, that Jiva Goswami, when he's defining what smarana is in his Bhakti Sandarbha, does, so he goes, I forget all the stages, but begins with dhyana, and then dharana, then dhruvanusmriti, all the way to samadhi, and these correspond to the last three limbs of Yoga Sutra. So in another sense, the early Goswamis themselves are also drawing on this corpus. But I think there was a third question. What was the?
No, there wasn't.
There wasn't. Was that basically? Did that address some of what you were? Why they do? I mean, I think in terms of ritual, I think it's fairly evident.
Is it purely? My question, let me rephrase this. Is it something which is purely internal, or is it also a reflection of broader changes, broader contemporary changes?
Yeah, I think
in thought and practice.
Yeah.
And as far as perfecting the body is concerned, Hatha Yoga was the first candidate actually.
Oh yeah.
Siddha Deha certainly is closer to Hatha Yoga than Patanjali.
And then also the Nath Siddhas are also using this Siddha Deha. But interestingly, Lubomir Ondranchka says that actually it's in the Gaudiya text where you actually find the Siddha Deha formalized in that way. The term doesn't apparently appear, but so there was one point, how do you know your Siddha? How do you know your Siddha? That, this is interesting, that actually the Siddha body is not considered to be the final body either. It's it's still a practitioner body, so it's not necessarily perfect, but it's preparing you for perfection in a sense. There's also, in contemporary settings, debates surrounding, is the body given by the Guru, or does it somewhat emerge in, is there some volition of the practitioner themselves? When you're perfect, I mean, that's a very, that's a deep question. I don't know how would, and then as Chaitanya himself is saying, the closer you get to it, the more humble you become. So to the point where Chaitanya is saying, I don't have even the whiff, the scent of praying. So at what point you would go, I'm Siddha, is it's a complicated one, and it's filled with suspicion in some sense. So
this connects to what Professor Shen, the historical explanation for the inclusion of this Manjari Sharvana and yoga and those yogic practices. Did it happen all of a sudden? I mean, that was the question. And how do you explain that? And how did it evolve? What are the historical factors behind that? Another thing is that when you say passion pursuant and then paddhati, are they contradictory in that way? That when I'm passionate about something, do I remain mindful of the techniques of the systems, or I transcend those systems, or I'm really passionate about it?
Also, Lucian, I didn't like the word, the use of the word greed. I think desire is much better.
Desire, intense desire, intense
Greed
desire.
Has a negative resonance about it.
So does passion, actually, in some theological circles.
It does, but that's a puritanical.
Or the Buddhist as well, raga is not something, raga is the clinging to, right? The attachment. It's a root cause of entanglement.
So were they kind of influenced by the Buddhist and the non-theist and others to incorporate these yogic systems and paddhatis?
Yeah, in terms of how the paddhatis, I can't give you like in terms of what the causal factors here are. So far I've observed, what I've seen the developments. Why, I haven't done a lot of deep thinking about why these things appear. I think maybe there's also just a tendency, you articulate, you put something out there, and over time, as something spreads, and more people, but it's no longer just the high theoreticians, but now this is being disseminated. You need more to be said about it. You know what I mean? You need more formalization. You need more, people need techniques. If it's vague to Srinivas in his letters, and he's a great Sanskrit scholar, etc. Who's it going to be vague to? Who the villages that are now receiving connection with this Chaitanya Dharma, etc. So maybe there's just the natural evolution of a thing. So the other part of your question I wanted to also address. What was the?
This is what I said, that it is passion driven.
Oh yeah. And I think on this, an interesting, we were speaking about this in Vilnius when this panel that Tony was responding to, but I think a good analogy there maybe is something like, jazz music. Yeah? I mean, it's not comparative, but in the sense of like how much training goes into mastering a instrument before you can start to improvise and appear to be spontaneous. How much training is involved in that? Sometimes what appears to be free is rooted in a great deal of, this is, okay, Gavin Flood's, one of his inspirations is John Bowker. He says freedom, constraint as one of the conditions of freedom. You know what I mean? So you can say like, so you can, those who have, when there's more constraint, more possibility of different kinds of freedom. Less constraint, an amoeba, less freedom.
Well, for one, you make the effort.
Yeah, exactly. So constraint as a condition of freedom maybe might be seen as
And this Manjari Shaman, the handmaidens, their involvement, how did it go? I mean, it was not there in the beginning.
Oh, it was there. It is hinted at in the beginning. There is some mention, early writings, as I said, presaged in the writings of Rupa and especially Raghunath Das, that they feature, but then they start to become thematized more prominently over time. And the reason for this is interesting. There are maybe also some theological shifts where I think the theological justification for this is that whereas so if we take love, prema, devotion is like having a vishoy and an ashray, yeah, ashray, the shelter of it and the object of love. Krishna being the object, Radha being the ashray. She's the infinite ashray in one sense. Yeah. So how much devotion can she contain and give, like that? So the example sometimes is given. It says, if you are a very amateur chef and you're doing some cooking and whatever, or you now work for a master chef and they can help you turn your vegetables into something much more delicious than if you just, so the notion that like now to access this, we must then go through Radha. So this then takes on prominence, Radha Dasyam, where now the Vishoy becomes Radha Krishna, becomes a joint Vishoy, like that. And then the notion of the Manjari is like the position of greatest intimacy that a sadhaka can hope to aspire to. Servitor. So this, yeah, exactly.
So Chaitanya also practiced Manjari Sadhana?
No, I don't think so.
No, his is more the Radha Bhav. So he's directly, but then those who are, I mean, I can't speak for what goes on in Shahajiya circles of text so much. I mean, I'm currently reading Vivarta Vilas with Glenn Hayes. Yeah. But
what about Gadadhar Pandit?
oh yes.
Who was the Manjari Sadhana?
Yeah, interestingly, Gadadhar Pandit's position, identity, is a little bit complicated. According to, I think it's Gaura Ganadish Deepika, he's identified with Rukmini in Dwarka. In Dwarka, Krishna in this Dwarka context, so like a queen. So this is strange. And then in Krishnadas Kaviraj, I forget what he says, but doesn't really specify. But later tradition comes to see Gadadhar as in some ways, well, he identifies him as incarnation of Shakti, and comes to be identified himself as representing Radha in some way. But then one contemporary theologian, Swami V.R. Sridhar, I find his explanation quite interesting. So how do you get Rukmini and Radha? Rukmini is not really Radha in the context of the Krishna Lila, because she's more submissive. But then, okay, so if Gauranga is Krishna stealing the bhav and kanti of Radha, yeah? Well, she has no bhav, her heart has been stolen now. So now Gadadhar, who is seen as submissive to Chaitanya, is now following after, she is like Radha, he is like Radha with her heart stolen. So following after Chaitanya, like a shadow, in a sense. So this is how to find some explanation for why Ganadish Deepika says Rukmini and others are saying Radha. So like that. But yeah, so it was also natural that the earliest layer of the tradition, they are the participants in the Leela in Krishna, like they are the ones after them, the second generation, third, fourth, they have to keep negotiating, well, who are these personalities? So we can say the earliest ones are Radha Krishna, the gopis, etc. Well, now who are we? Well, we can't be the gopis anymore. Okay, we be the junior ones. And now the next ones? The Manjari role allows for many Manjaris, in a sense, So in another sense, this also accommodates the proliferation of the tradition over time. like that, yeah?
Any other question?